Hey, peace and blessings. This is your brother Sorry back with another one. Yeah, just wanted to make a quick one. Honestly, with this one, this is gonna be another one. Add to the whole series about the Twa, the pygmies. Um, honestly, yeah, gonna get back into this. This pygmy Kitabu. We've been doing, a lot of our stuff about the pygmies has come from this. The author, he journeyed and I think spent over 10 years in the forest with the pygmies and stuff like that, learn their language and stuff like that, and learn their culture and a lot of the mythos and the stories associated with who they are. Those of you who may not be familiar with the whole relevance of the pygmies or the Twa, as far as Africa is concerned, um, as far as Egypt, the whole mythos of Egypt is built on top of the pygmies, like where they come from, the mountains of the moon, the source of the Nile River. That was the land of the gods as far as the Egyptians were concerned. So their whole civilization was built off the foundation of the sciences and the know-how, metallurgy, all kind of things that the pygmy herbology, all kind of things that the Twa actually laid down or whatever the case may be. So we've been kind of going into, the Twa, um, some of the where they say they're from, their stories and the mythos. Now, honestly, it's a lot of stuff. Um, we were, I have, I can't read this whole book on, on a video or what have you. So, um, but from what I get from it, majority of the mythology period on the planet comes out of the mythos of the Twa. They have the thing, the man in the moon. They have the which ties into the Father God and His prophet and everything like that. They have the whole thing with the where Bess kills the dragon and everything like that. It's all kind of dragon slayer myths or whatever. Bess, if it goes into the underworld and gets reborn, that's your death and resurrection story and everything like that. Um, uh the first man eats the apple and stuff like that, and God kicks him out of the garden. When he gets kicked out of the garden, the languages are confounded, all this stuff like that. The God that dwells in the mountain and gives his commandments from the mountain and everything like that. The even when you get into their story of the deluge and everything like that, and the pole shifts, we'll kind of get into that. And they talk about that's where Ragnarok comes from. We talked about that already, the nine realms and everything like that, how that comes from the environment, the topological environment of the pygmies. So we're going to get into a lot of that. Of course, I'm going to get into this pygmy to Katabu, but I'm also going to get into okay, we're also gonna get into this right here, David Imhotep's beast of work. The first Americans were African. I don't know if y'all can, see inside of this. This is my personal copy, and this is, it's highlighted and marked up like a subway in Harlem. You feel me? So I underlined and highlighted this all to be damned. So it's gonna be a pretty good discourse today. I like what y'all been hearing. Like and subscribe. Let's get into it. We're gonna jump into this. First Americans were African. This is the revised edition. Let's get into it. All right. Now we're gonna get into this. The first Americans were Africans by Dr. David Imhotep. Now this is kind of one I was kind of holding this one back a little bit because I mean this is a fairly lengthy book. Um, I'm gonna use some of this because he has some good information about the Algonquins and everything like that, and a lot of the Native Americans in America and in the Southern United States. I'm gonna cross reference that when I get I lost my copy of the brother. I had to order another copy from the brothers coming in the mail. Lanier Davis's book. He goes over some of the oral traditions of the Yamasee elders, going all the way back into Mexico and everything like that. He goes into some of that oral traditions, so it kind of bleeds into the some of the stuff he got in here. So I'm this won't be the last time you see me reference this book right here, but I'm gonna come in with this foreword. This foreword is done by Dr. Clyde Winters, and If you looking at this book right here, you have like some sort of preconceived notion in regards of some sort of preconceived thought process behind the origin of America. Dr. Clyde Winters, he comes in like a home invasion with this how he breaks it down. I mean, he goes straight in. Dr. David Imhotep presents keen insight into the ancient history of America. In this book, he outlines the lost and stolen history of African people in ancient America. You will discover the long antiquity of African people in the New World and how they contributed to the rise of civilization in the West. Most of us have learned that people walked across the land bridge from northeastern Asia to Alaska about 12,000 years ago. Dr. Imhotep systematically destroys the notion that the Clovis culture represents the first American civilization, rather than began his story of the African in America with the slave trade. Dr. Imhotep provides details about the first civilizations in the New World, which were created by Black and African people. Blacks are indirectly from Africa. Africans are directly from Africa. We know that the Beringia passage between Asia and North America was blocked by ice between 110,000 to 12,000 years ago. Archaeological evidence indicates that anatomically modern humans were living in South America between 30,000 and 15,000 years ago. We will learn this, although the Ice Age was a barrier to man's overland migration to the New World. There were many blacks here even before the ice melted. Several peoples of African origin entered the Americas, including the San Annu, or the Negrito types, and the Proto-Saharan variety of blacks. Proto meaning original or first, and the Annu were the Pygmy people who were hunter-gatherers in Africa. Yet it was they who founded the first civilization of Kush, Nubia, and Egypt before the rise of the first pharaoh, as well as the first civilization in Mesopotamia. So this is the first page of the book after the table of contents. So that's Dr. Clyde Winters in in rare form. So this is an interesting book. When he's talking about the pygmies at the tip of South America, he's talking about those in Tierra del Fuego. He's talking about, I know in previous videos when we referenced the pygmies and stuff like that, we talked about the language that they speak, the language with the click consonants, the clicking sounds and everything like that. The individuals in Tierra del Fuego, they also have a language that they speak with click consonants. We also established in previous videos that those languages with the click consonants and all that, those are language isolates. Ain't there's nothing that precedes that. Nobody knows where those languages come from. They just popped out of nowhere. Someday they have no relative or whatever case may be. So yeah, we're gonna get into this a little bit further. All right, so let's keep going. Today, archaeologists have found sites from Argentina to Chile that range in age between 45,000 and 50,000 years old. These sites are Pedra Forada, circa 45,000 BC, and Serra de Capivara, 50,000 years ago. The fact that the earliest dates of habitation of the American continent occur below Canada in South America suggests that the earliest American settlers came from Africa before the ice melted at the Bering Strait and moved northward as the ice melted. The prehistoric African presence in the New World may explain the affinities between African language and the Amerid family of languages. The Amerid family of languages are the tribes, these similar families of Native American tribes or what have you. He's comparing the languages and everything like that. Or he's classed them into a group. They have a common language. Yes, the American continent was inhabited by Asian and African blacks in a very ancient time. However, the oldest skeletal remains found in Americas are of blacks on the eastern area of Americas. Marquez observed that it is good to report that long ago the youthful America was also a Negro continent, right? So the youthful America was also a Negro continent, and he's talking about some of the same stuff that we've kind of been talking about in some of these videos about the pygmies. Go back to the video about the moon and everything like that. My theory was that the moon caused this change from the Heliocene to the Pleistocene to the Heliocene and everything like that. And you're gonna hear those words come about again, the warming of the planet or whatever. So when we talk about this period of time, circa 12,000 years ago, it's equated with the sinking of Atlantis. It's equated with the global deluge and everything like that. But it's not a myth. It's equated with stories that you can choose to equate to consider those as myths or not. But the actual event going from the Pleistocene to the Heliocene, which we're currently in, that's not a that's not a mythological thing. Okay, let's see here. Yes, the American continent was inhabited by Asians and Africans. Okay, let's see here. Um, as above stated, these sites are Pedra Ferrada, circa 45,000 BC, and Serra de Capivara, 50,000 years ago. Archaeologists originally dated the former from 48,000 to 10,000 years ago. At Pedra Ferrada, Brazilian archaeologists have found cave paintings, hearths, and deliberately flaked pebbles. Recent archaeological show evidence from the Brazilian site of Boqueirão do Sítio da Pedra Ferrada. I know I'm killing words. I'm butchering words. Excuse me. With a long cultural sequence possibly extending as far back as 32,000 years before the present era, in the Chilean site of Monte Verde. This latter site has one well-documented cultural episode radiocarbon dated at 13,000 years before the present era, and another possible one at 33,000 years before the present era. There are mastodon hunting in Venezuela and Colombia circa 13,000 years ago, and Dr. Walter Neves discovers discovery of a 12,000-year-old skeleton of an African. All of these are evidence of human occupation, charcoal samples from the campsite age, the site of 65,000 years. The evidence shows the oldest skulls in the Americas do not add to the theory that the first peoples in the Americas entered from Asia in the west, but from Africa in the east. Several studies of cranio-facial morphology showed the Paleo Indians. That is a very important word that they bring, you know, to your attention in this in this book in particular. Paleo Indians, because they're talking about Africans, but they use all these little funny words, and if you didn't know, you see what I'm saying, you wouldn't know what they're talking about. When you do research on Native Americans, you run into that. You run into all these different names. Like if I was looking up the Yamasi, you got the Gualo, the Miccosukee. You know what I'm saying? Yamasi, it's several different names, but they talking about the same people. You see what I'm saying? And if you didn't know no better, you think they're talking about different people. So you have to be kind of mindful of that. But Paleo Indians, who were the first settlers of the New World, clearly differ from modern Amerindians or Amerids and East Asians, their supposed descendants and their sister group, respectively. These results give support to a model in which morphology generalized groups of non-Northeast Asian descent, the so-called Paleoamericans, entered the continent first and then dispersed from North to South America throughout Central America. All right. So basically, they talking about your original inhabitants of America, because we've already established in previous videos that these ancient people were seafaring people. When you see megaliths, remember we were referencing the book Karl Monk's The Code. When you see megaliths, ancient people were aware of latitude and longitude. So in many of these megalithic structures and everything like that, if they're smart enough to build megalithic structures, they've encoded the latitude and longitude into the megalithic structure. They sailed and everything like that. So these were not um, dumb people by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, and speaking of seafaring people, you see what I'm saying? This is another interesting piece when we start talking about the Twa. We start getting into their migration patterns and everything like that. All right, we still in the foreword. Um, uh, Dr. Clyde Winter still going in, I believe. In his two books, Saga America and America BC, Dr. Fell argues this theory. He believes that these Europeans had colonies in northeast and southwest part of the United States. In support of this theory, Dr. Fell has published a number of inscriptions which he claims were made by the early Europeans. The only problem with this theory is that the ancient Celts and first Vikings were black people, and the inscriptions he claims were written by Europeans were really written by Mande-speaking people from Mali, who settled many parts of the Americas after 1300 AD. Yes, Celts were originally black people. In reviewing Winter's foreword in this book, the ancient Greek historian Eophorus 405 BC claims that Celts were blacks or Ethiopians. See that word again, a word coming up again, Ethiopians, because remember how we talked about in the previous video, um, Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Nubians all considered themselves Ethiopians, right? Okay, Tacitus, an ancient Roman historian, wrote about the Celts and Picts being black back in 880 AD. The Celts on the mainland of Europe were called Iberians or Sulares. Um, Iberia is the ancient name of Spain. Although the original Celts were black, over time their name was stolen by Europeans. Father O'Grady has discussed the history of the Celts. He makes it clear that the original Celts were the Iberians. The Iberians were probably conquered by the Ligurians. The Ligurians. Liguria was a coastal region of northwest Italy. It is suggested that the Ligurians may be represented by the modern Basques of Spain. The Ligurians took the name Celt. Excuse me. The Ligurians took the name Celt. The Ligurian Celts were conquered by the Gaulish-speaking people. Ancient Gaul was considered to be modern France, Belgium, and southern Netherlands, southwest Germany, and northern Italy. The Gauls conquered the Ligurians and pushed them into Spain. It was the Gauls who imposed a language on the Iberians and Ligurian Celts. The Gauls were Belgians, according to Father O'Grady. The Irish and Welsh are descendants of these Gauls. The Gauls spoke Gaulish or Gaelic. The Germans conquered the Gaulish Celts, and the Gaulish disappeared around 4th century AD. All of the black Celts in Britain were not erased by the Gauls, however. This is supported by evidence of the Ivory Lady of York, England. The reconstruction of the face of the Ivory Bangle Lady, circa 350 AD, indicates that she was African or black. She was a wealthy woman whose features were indicative of the African type common to the British Isles at that time. Um, there is genetic and linguistic evidence that proves the Celts were black or African people. An examination of the language spoken by the Basques indicates a Niger-Congo substratum underlying Dr. CJK Campbell Dunn has found a Niger-Congo substratum in Basque. Found Congo and Basque languages shared personal pronouns, numerals, and certain vocabulary. There is also genetic evidence linking the Basque and Niger-Congo speakers. The evidence suggests that both groups had the same genetic ancestry. This linguistic and genetic evidence support the African origins for the Celts. All right, the original, just going down a little bit, the original Danes or Vikings were black. This is made clear by the description of Osenberg, 8th century Viking, on the Norway slave carving of the black seafarers that populated the region at the time. It was clear from this carving that the 8th century Vikings were different from the blonde, big-bodied folk of Viking legends, given the fact that the first Celts and Vikings were black, made it clear that even if the people did reach the New World during the Middle Ages, they were not Europeans, but the proof that the first people to settle the Americas were Africans come from the surviving inscriptions. All right, the inscriptions deciphered by Dr. Pelle in his work were not written in the Old Norse language. He claimed these inscriptions were written by the followers of Abu Bakr the Great. He was a ruler of the ancient Mali Empire who made an expedition to the Americas in 1300 AD. Members of the Mali expedition left numerous inscriptions throughout the New World. Evidence shows that they wrote in the Manding writing system, which is understood by using the African Vey script to read the Mande inscriptions the Malians left in the Americas. Yeah, because he gets into the various different iterations of the Twa that go out into the world, into different places, and in different places they call different things or whatever. But you always have a group of small people, you see what I'm saying, that precede the existing people in that place. I believe when you start getting into the Vikings and all that, you get into the Skraelings and all that. The Eskimos, he talks about how they're related to the Twa. You know what I'm saying? He goes into all the various iterations and how they mixed and spread out all across the world. Okay, now he's gonna get a little bit more into some of this territory, like how it was talking about in previous videos. He's putting a lot more emphasis on this event that happened like 12,000 years ago when the temperature changed and the earth changed and everything like that, or what have you. Um, this is the introduction to the book. Okay, so he goes in, he's still in the first Americans were African, right? Okay, the ancient Pale map is probably the oldest map known to man. The reasoning behind the statement is that this map had to have been drawn before the last ice age ended. During the ice age, much more of the lands in the northern and southern latitudes were covered with ice, which means that there was less water in the oceans. With less water in the oceans, the more land there was exposed and visible for all eyes to see. Because more land was visible, one of those places was the ancient peninsula running between South America and connecting to Antarctica. It is there on the Piri Reis map. This was also the exact same period that there was a glacial land bridge connecting Asia to modern day Alaska. Many other old maps had also been found. All right. This is not the place to consider the implications of large numbers of ancient maps that have been found, drawn up before the 18th century, and based on copies of even older maps, which display almost perfect longitudes, as have been shown elsewhere. Such maps could be the legacy of a race of seafarers in remote history, in remote prehistory. Then we say that the Phoenicians call themselves Ethiopians, and then we say that they sailed all around the world, and then we even say that the Twa in their stories, they were seafarers that worked metal and they had high technology, but they chose to live a simple life and stuff like that. So in some bygone era, they had high technology and they were sailing all over the planet. Same thing we were talking about the Phoenicians. So it was a large demographic of seafaring going on, in a prehistorical bygone era. You see what I'm saying? It sounds similar themes we was talking about in the rest of our videos, right? Okay, so such maps could be the legacy of a race of seafarers in a remote prehistory, a lost advanced civilization that measured the globe. That measured the globe. Remember, I told you ancient people knew about latitude and longitude and surrounded it with a net of geodetic coordinates more than 12,000 years ago. So prior to when the reason why I say 12,000 years ago, because they're talking about this whatever this event was that happened to the planet and changed the planet. Um, Biblically speaking, we would call it the flood or what have you. Scientifically, the younger dryas, whatever you want to call it. It's a lot of different names for it, but it's an actual thing. Okay, in his book Fingerprints of the Gods, Graham Hancock uses the ancient map as evidence for the possibility of a civilization, and yet unidentified civilization of remote antiquity, but also startling evidence of its vast sophistication, technological advancement, and evolved scientific knowledge. There had indeed been an ancient lost super civilization destroyed 12,000 years ago. We keep dwelling on that 12,000 year date. Okay. In his maps of the ancient sea kings, Charles Hapgood produces concrete evidence of an advanced worldwide civilization many thousands of years before Egypt. It looks as if these people had visited most of the earth. There is evidence that these people must have lived when the ice age had not yet ended in the northern hemisphere and when Alaska was still connected with Siberia by the Pleistocene um, ice age land bridge, right? Talk about the Pleistocene. Pleistocene is what went out the like when they talking about Paleolithic, Paleo Americans and all that, that's the people who lived during the Pleistocene era. We're in the Helicene now. Um, and now Dr. David Imhotep goes a little further and deeper, uncovering an intensifying version of Hancock and Hapgood's version and adding a little more with a little less conversation. Once upon a time in the gold age of Zep Tepi, okay, the first time. This is I think we spoke about um, a section of Egyptian history that goes back like 36,000 years in one of the previous videos. This is the proper name for it, the Zep Tepi, the first time. There was a peaceful, ancient African, antediluvial, worldwide, maritime, megalithic, mercantile super civilization. This means that there was a peaceful, ancient African civilization existing before the old catastrophic flood all over the world. They traveled the world by ship and built structures with very large blocks. When they reached a foreign land, they were peaceful, partnered, and traded with indigenous people who were already there. A good example are the Olmec, who began at three different peoples: unmixed indigenous black Africans, Manding Africans who had mixed with Asian Mongolians, creating the so-called Native Americans. This new three-group coalition probably built the mother civilization in Central America, containing large temples and pyramids. Lastly, they built a mercantile international trading network with the distant black folks across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, creating a connecting super civilization across the globe. This pre-flood era is called the Golden Age, or Zep Tepi, right? So he pretty much lays it out. That's very similar to what we've been talking about, this whole thing. And really, when you explore the history and you keep going back far enough, you're going to run into the brick wall of this 12,000 year ago period of time. And something happened in history where history changed and stuff like that. And then prior to that, you're going to run into stuff like what he's talking about, evidence of some global civilization that had technology beyond what we have. And it's not like we didn't find any flying saucers or nothing, but just the level of their engineering, the things that they were able to build, the stones they were able to cut, the weight of the stones and things that they were able to move to other locations versus where they got them from or whatever. We know that they had surpassed us in engineering and mathematical abilities even 12,000 years ago. So that's just one thing. Okay, we're gonna jump around to this Pygmy Kitabu real quick. Okay, so let's go in. This chapter is called The Children of Ife. This is page 239, right? Numok Much Anat, the first or only man, was the sole survivor of the sad catastrophe which had happened on the earth's surface by the overflowing of the waters. His people, the Mandan Indians, were a branch of the great Sauk's nation. They had been called white Indians because of their fair complexion and sometimes blue eyes. The ancestors of the Sauk's nation survived the sad catastrophe by retreating to the vast caverns which they dwelled in a village near a subterranean lake. The Choctaw ancestors escaped the deluge in the cave of a towering mountain called Nunu Chaha. The Blackfoot ancestors fled to the cave of the Nina Stahu. When the waters of the flood receded, the great god Isigta Imisi took up his residence on Nini Chaha and modeled the Creek Indian ancestors out of clay. The Shoshone ancestors peopled the world when they returned from the cavern. The Pony ancestors brought the pipe, drum, fire, corn, and pumpkin seed back from the cave where they took shelter during the deluge. The ancestors of the Apurinas and Yuracare tribes who dwell in Bolivia and northwestern Brazil sought refuge in the enormous cave after the great flood that followed the burning of the world. The ancestors found that the entrance to the cave was blocked. With a considerable effort, they were able to escape. The Yankaya, the founding father of the Zuni and the Pueblo Indians tribes, cut an exit from the cave after the deluge had subsided. The Apek, the chief priest of the moon god, cutting the opening that enabled the Inca ancestors to emerge from Pakari, the cave of refuge. He was the son of Gamansura, the first mortal to descend to the earth. The son of Ife cut a hole or path through the foot of the mountain mother after the Lulu monster extirpated the men and cities of the ancient world. The lunar angel form of Ife made the trip to earth and modeled his earthly incarnation out of soil. Ife, the first man and last man on earth, came back from the cavernous kingdoms of the dead and survived the deluge. All men are his children. It's Zamna, or Kabul, the Mayan god of the moon, was the father of the gods and men. Archaeologist J.E.S. Thompson describes our mother, the Mayan mother god, as a lady of lax morals. Matu, the lady of lunar mountains, cannot be judged by the human standards. The Kik Indian branch of the Mayan nation say that their ancestors returned from the seven caves of Tula Ziva after the rest of mankind was annihilated by fire and flood. The Aztec ancestors survived the disaster in a shelter called Chicomotztac, the cavern of the seven chambers. It has been identified with Midland of the Aztec Hades or Kingdom of the Dead. In the saga of the hero's trip to Hades, Ifa came back from the cave world in the legend of the Deluge. He climbed a tree. In Brazil, the Tapu Guarani tribes say that their ancestors survived the deluge by hiding in caves and climbing trees. In the Guianas, the Arawak Indians tell the story of Sigu, the king of the forest, who caused and survived the deluge. In the forest was a tree knowledge which Siegel cut down in order to plant his seeds all over the earth from the stump. However, water began to gush forth and soon turned into a great deluge. The birds climbing animals took refuge on the top treetops, while the others were led by Sigu into caves where they remained in safety until the disaster was over. When the deluge came, he placed those animals which could not climb in a cave, the entrance of which he sealed. He himself climbed into the branches of the high tree where he remained until the flood was over. All right. So these are their stories of the flood. So it's just going into how um, their story of how they survived the flood parallels to how the pygmies survived the flood. We're gonna do a whole nother video about the death and resurrection, the journey of the pygmy Ife into the underworld, because that ties into so many more motifs or whatever. And I didn't want to kind of bog down this video with that too. So yeah, the Amerindian tribes have been repeatedly accused of borrowing their deluge legends and other quasi-biblical stories from Christian missionaries. The Arawak flood gushed from ruptured trees of the Pygmy legend. Pygmy fossils have been found in the Guyanas, New Mexico, Guatemala, Peru, Chile, and other American localities. The many Pygmoid tribes of the New World include the Locandones Indians and Mayan people who dwell in the forest of the Yucatan and Guatemala. The Christian missionaries who come to this region were greatly disconcerted by the quasi-Christian customs and theology of the Mayans. The number of similarities between the two faiths led them to believe that St. Thomas had preached the gospel in these parts and that after some 1,500 years of degeneration, Christian practices remained. However, there is no reason to believe that Christianity reached the New World before the arrival of Columbus. 12 Christian missionaries sailed with Columbus on his second voyage to America. 5 shiploads of Carib Indians were sent to Seville in June 24, 1495, to be sold as slaves. Heavy tributes were imposed on the West Indian tribes. There are no more Carib Indians. They somehow became extinct. The Pygmies discovered America long before Columbus and his missionaries brought their brand of civilization to the New World. Where did the Pygmies come from? So yeah, so okay, so we're talking as we get back into this. The first Americans were African. It's going to talk about how the Pygmies have been in the southern tip of South America for like 200,000 years. The Fuegians, the people of Sierra del Fuego that speak the language of the click consonants, they go back like a quarter of a million years. So, and that's you know that's how far that it's assumed that they go back. So from a quarter million years ago up until this 12,000 year span of time, you see what I'm saying? They've been there. So when they say that the pygmies discovered North America or whatever the case may be, or America, period, that's kind of what we're talking about. And when we say the pygmies are members of this root race and all this stuff like that or whatever, that's kind of what we're talking about. We're getting into ridiculous um, 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 expanses of time as it pertains to when we think about functional people, because in as it pertains to anthropologists and people like that, we're constantly taught to think that these people are primitive people or what have you. But as we explore some of the things that they say they did, and as we explore some of the stuff that we can see that they did, we can clearly see that they were not primitive. In various ways, they're more advanced than we are today. So, all right, we're gonna jump to page 244 in Pygmy Kitabu. All right, the Athenian king Theseus alternately emerged from Tartarus or the tunnels of a legendary death maze. The New World offers some rather revealing evidence as to the radical affiliations of the original labyrinth builders. Archaeologists have long been puzzled by the maze of undersized tunnels and stairways which were found in the pre-Inca ruins of Sachuman, and other South American Dawn cities. Tunnels so tiny that children have difficulty navigating their sharp turns. Doorways so small that their use would have been restricted to what we call midgets. Yet both the tunnels and the doorways bear evidence of use, a great deal of it. For the hard stone from which the pathways were made is deeply worn. Who were these little people? Where did they come from? What happened to them? At this late date, it is unlikely that we should ever have the answers to those questions, barring some near miracle discovery of evidence which could provide the clues we need. All that remain are the miles of narrow tunnels cut through solid rock and deeply worn by tiny feet. A maze of pygmy-sized tunnels connect the chambers of the Etruscan necropolis, Etruskia, Etruria. Now we're talking about in Europe, inside the Italian hill of Pogo uh, Gagella. This monument was apparently patterned after the Pygmies' legendary kingdoms in the mountains of the moon. You see, like it's a lot of stuff that's patterned after the Pygmies in the mountains of the moon. Arabic legends describe the lunar mountains as the source of the four rivers that flowed out of Eden. The four rivers flow from a legendary mountain, Kunlun, that was the earthly capital of the Chinese deity called the Lord of the Sky. This mountain was in the west of the world. The approach of it was protected by mysterious thin waters where nothing, not even a goose feather, could float, or else by red water, vermilion, which encircled the mountain 3 times before returning to its source. Anyone who drank of it obtained immortality. According to concurrent traditions, the Kunlun was either the source of the Yellow River or source of four great rivers, including the Yellow River, which flowed in four directions, excluding north. This detail regarding the four rivers is important, for it is the firmest in favor of a comparison between the Kunlun and the Sumeru of Indian mythology. The mountain itself towered up in 9 superimposed steps of story like the sky. In its sides or summits were doors, 4, 9, or 440 in number, according to various authors, and through them emerged the winds, right? So it's showing how these various things are taken from the pygmy mythos. Even in ancient times, some of this stuff that some of these tunnels and labyrinths that they find and built, or whatever the case may be, it had to be built by small people, smaller than children. You see what I'm saying? Sumeru and Meru were both titles of the Hindu Olympus at the center of the earth. Remember, we talking about stuff at the center of the earth. We talking about the mountains of the moon or on the equator, and the old prime meridian before it became Greenwich, England. It used to be in line with the Great Pyramid. So if we put the prime meridian in line with the Great Pyramid, that's 0 degrees longitude, and we get 0 degrees latitude, we got the mountains of the moon at the actual navel of the earth. Sumeru and Meru were both titles of the Hindu Olympus at the center of the earth. The Germanic Heaven Mountain, World Ash Tree, and city of Asgard, Troy, were all located at the center of the earth. Etymologists have suggested that the hill or rock with an opening is the opening of uh, I can't pronounce that. Halejef, the name of Odin's high seat or throne. Odin's hall of Valhalla had more than 640 doors. Thor's residence, Bilskirnir, was an enormous house of winding ways with more than 640 floors. The tunnels of the original Troy town maze wind their way into the mountain's house of God. So it's just showing once again how your Norse mythology is modeled after this Twa story and everything like that. And it's even gonna get further here as we keep going. We're gonna start talking about Ragnarok and what that really is, how that's when these poles flip and stuff like that. You see what I'm saying? All right, page 248, Pygmy Kitabu. The American Indian ancestors came back from the cave world after the cataclysm subsided. They did not make this trip every year. Some critics explain that Yema and the elect retreated to the Zoroastrian cave to escape a cataclysm which takes its pattern from the icy winters and torrential thaws of Central Asia. Winter never comes to the equatorial rainforest, in which the Pygmies tell numerous legends of the terrible cold, the killer cold that ravaged the ancient world. So what he's implying as we keep getting into this, it don't get cold. They don't have winter. They're on the equator. So when they talking about how it gets cold and everything like that, they're talking about when the poles shift and the temperate zones of the planet change and things of that nature. They're talking about some catastrophic type stuff as it pertains to the planet. All right, back at 268, Pygmy Kitabu. Okay, the bird demons of the north are associated or collaborate with the volcanic monsters at the source of the Nile. The northern continent of Edus was a frozen wasteland. So was Europe during the Pleistocene period, or the Great Ice Age that was supposed to have ended around 10,000 BC. Geological theories alternatively describe massive outbursts of volcanism as a paramount cause and effect of these ice ages. Professor Charles Hapgood's book Shifting Crust favors the theory that eccentrically balanced ice caps exert centrifugal force that cause crustal fractures, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and polar shifts, perturbations of the Earth's axis as indicated in other theories of the Pleistocene. Many scientists maintain that the present or so-called recent period is an interglacial lull in the catastrophic Pleistocene. They predict imminent polar shifts, the return of the North American and European ice caps, a sharp increase in mutation rate caused by changes in the Earth's magnetic field, mass extinctions, and the destructions of urban civilization. The Great Ragnarok, or Great Winter or of Ragnarok, or Guten Dämmerung, the twilight of the gods, has rightly been compared to the onset of an ice age. The recurring cycles of world ages of Germanic theology represent the periodic glaciations of the Pleistocene. The end of the cultural epoch known as the Pleistocene period or the Old Stone Age is traditionally dated like the end of the Pleistocene at around 10,000 BC, like what we've been talking about. African pygmies traveled to the Americas by unknown means during the Pleistocene, the Paleolithic Pleistocene. According to Professor Adrian Lucena, reports on the 42 skeletons of Venezuelan pygmies that were unearthed in 1971 in his book Men Out of Asia. Harold S. Gladwin suggested that the pygmies may have migrated from Siberia to Alaska prior to 25,000 BC, when Australoids or archaic Caucasoid people made a theoretical trek across the Bering Strait land bridge that was connected to Asia and North America during Ice Age times. Pygmies before Australoids in the New World, as McGowan and Hester study early man in the New World. The authors discuss the much disputed identity of early Americans. Both M. Belloni and Gladwin begin with a suggestion that the pygmies deserve consideration. These primordial migrants trod their tiny paces from some unknown fatherland to the forests of the Congo and the jungles of New Guinea, to islands like Andaman and possibly Tasmania. The presence of 5-foot Yagan in Tierra del Fuego suggests to both Imbeloni and Gladwin that pygmies may have preceded the Australoids to the New World. The advent of the pygmies in Tierra del Fuego as well as Tasmania may be open to question, for in both places the natives, though short, exceeded the average of pygmy height by a few inches, and heads, instead of being round like those of the pygmies, are recorded as medium cephalic index. Gladwin begins with what might be called a pygmoid visitation. He does not dignify it with the word migration. He is careful to say that there are only rather vague indications. There is just enough to make one wonder if there may not have been a few pygmy groups who stayed over here long ago, um, and were pushed off to the edges and ends when the asteroid tide flowed in. If a scientific study is ever made in the Guyana highlands of Venezuela, some support may be given to the theory of an early pygmy migration. Carl Sauer, on a visit to Venezuela in 1946, saw a photograph of a pygmy-like people taken by a Venezuelan army officer who had paddled and packed the Guyana River for some years. There have been many unconfirmed reports of pygmy tribes that survive in the South African bush. There have been many finds of pygmy fossils in North, Central, and South America, including the very spectacular discovery in western Venezuela. The pygmoid or part pygmy people of Africa are a few inches taller than the pygmies, like the Yugon and other pygmoid tribes of the Americas. McGowan and Hester remarked that the heads of the pygmoid Americans, instead of being round like those of the pygmies, are recorded as a medium cephalic index. Statistics reported that Sylvester proved that 66.3% of the Ituri pygmies are equipped with mesocephalic cranial or heads of medium cephalic index. Let's see here. Let's see. African pygmy and American Indian skin colors typically range through shades of yellow, tan, bronze, copper, and red. Let's see here. Okay, the pygmy the pygmy fossils of the New World are described by most anthropologists as remains of negritos. The negritos or Asiatic pygmies are very dark-skinned people. The blue-black Amdam uh, Islanders have been called the blackest people in the world. They portray God or the first man as a tall, bearded black patriarch. The Pygmoid folk of Aboriginal tribes of Southern Asia are extremely swarthy. The anthropological theory that the Caucasoid stock arose in Africa locates the original home of European Caucasians in the archaic Caucasoid or Australoid fossils of the Americas in the land of the comparatively Paleoid African pygmies. The pygmies and the Australoids have been credited with the ice cap trips across the Bering Strait land bridge. Early man in the New World comments on the chronology and difficulties of the journey. So yeah, so they're going into basically their history all over the planet. Basically, they spread out all over the planet in a far gone era, and I know we're tracing back this time of 12,000 years ago when that's the proposed biblical deluge. But as you can see, um, by the time we get to 12,000 years ago is extreme antiquity to us, but that's nothing to them. That's a drop in the bucket for as long as they've been here on the planet or whatever. Like how we said, they've been in the southern tip of South America at least 250,000 years ago. So that's just a testament to how old the pygmies are. And we're gonna get back into some of this. The first Americans. What? Okay, so this is page 4. From okay, he's talking about a loss of over 95% of the hypothetical 100 million Indians in United States. I'll go ahead just to read this, just to give a little bit of context. Professor of American Studies at the University of Hawaii by the name of David Edward Stannard. Before the advent of Columbus, Stannard's Indians, as presented in the first section, lived an Edenic existence from the Bering Strait to Tierra del Fuego. On Indian cultural achievement, the author wants it both ways. Where they are civilized, he has them by far the superior to the Spanish conquistadors. Where they are simple hunter and gatherers, they have chosen an ideal life in perfect harmony with the abundance of nature. It is evident that Stannard leans strongly toward the researchers who see even the highest currently accepted estimates of the number of pre-Columbian Indians as too low. Of the hypothetical 100 million Indians of 1492 and their descendants, the author represents again, following the most extravagant estimates, that population loss among native societies routinely reached and exceeded 95%. A loss of 95% of the hypothetical 100 million Indians truly sounds like a Native American Holocaust. Excuse me, began because of Columbus. As a matter of fact, if the reader wishes for more, you will find more books written about that cover the topic. Okay. Um, from where did these first Americans begin? It all began in ancient Africa. All right, check this. Some sailed directly to the Americas, others traveled to Europe and eventually ended up in the Americas. To understand exactly what happened, the details are very important. At a site in Old Dovaya Gorge in Tanzania, Africa, anthropologists have found a human habitat with sharp-edged tools found there as well. The humans were of short stature, only 4.5 to 5.5 feet tall. Leakey and others tend to establish the fact that it was indeed a short African race which preceded the taller ones. I think we said that the in previous videos. I mean, the first Homo sapien Europeans were African, more specifically, short-statured sub-Saharan Khoisan Africans. So Khoisan, the San people, the Khoisan, those are iterations of the Twa. The Twa, the Bushmen, the Hottentots, those are all iterations of the Twa. Okay, known by their haplogroup NDNAH. They carried with them an ancient to ancient Europe. So he just mentioned the haplogroup that they belong to. 40,000 years ago. This evidence has been scientifically studied and documented in Dr. Imhotep's graduate school dissertation. This Khoisans or Auric Aurignacian migration from Northwest Africa to Europe was documented in Nature magazine 2011. The earliest anatomically modern humans in Europe are thought to have appeared 43,000 to 42,000 calendar years before the present, by association with the Aurignacian sites and lithic assemblages, a collection of stone tools assumed to have been made by modern humans rather than Neanderthals. Right? Okay, additional facts are presented in the same article. Using archaeological craniometry, scientific measurement of skulls, anthropological la, 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 the physical and cultural study of humankind, and studying human genes using samples of ancient mitochondrial DNA, we examined the possibility that there was a third exit from Africa of anatomical modern humans across the Straits of Gibraltar into Iberia, North Africa, into Spain, and thence throughout Eurasia. The finding of ancient sub-Saharan mitochondrial DNA and relative related evidences make it clear that the Aurignacian culture was taken into Eurasia from Africa by Cro-Magnon people crossing the Straits of Gibraltar. These sub-Saharan people who left Africa crossing the Straits of Gibraltar into Europe, then heading north and east, are known by several names: Khoisan, Aurignacian, Cro-Magnon. So all of these names that they given or whatever, they make you think that they're just different types of cavemen, but in reality, these are black people. These are iterations of the pygmies, iterations of the Twa. You see what I'm saying? Okay, so these sub-Saharan people left Africa crossing the Straits of Gibraltar into Europe, then heading north and east, as known by several names: Khoisans, Aurignacian, Cro-Magnon, and later Grimaldi. I think, if I'm not mistaken, some of these people that they mentioning or whatever case may be are some of the people that's, when we said the Pelagians are an amalgamation of tribes. So some of these groups that they mentioning are some of the amalgamation of some of these tribes. They sound very familiar. Um, let's see. Until recently, it was assumed that the earliest dates for HGN uh, genes were the Eastern Eurasian. This view has changed recently as a result of the extraction and examination of the ancient mitochondrial DNA from Cro-Magnon skeletons dating to Aurignacian period. The archaeological evidence indicates that AMH anatomically modern humans replaced Neanderthals during the Aurignacian period in Europe between 32 to 35,000 years ago. The Khoisan's Aurignacian civilization appeared to have expanded from Africa west to east. The founders of this culture came from Africa. Some researchers have argued that the Aurignacian culture was introduced to Europe from Africa. They based this conclusion on the fact that its tools were foreign to the Mousterian type, and the culture appears in a mature form throughout Europe, from France to Central Europe. The classic Aurignacian culture probably began in Africa, crossed the Straits of Gibraltar into Iberia, and expanded across Europe. Okay, during the brief ice age, an interstitial warming period was experienced in Europe circa 40,000 years ago. So the Khoisan entered many European landscapes from Africa. Some of these were inevitably valleys. In one of these European valleys, one of the Khoisan's many groups, several thousands of years later, were labeled the Yoruk, an African subgroup. After leaving their valley, sailing west, and landing in the Americas, they were called Native Americans. For reasons unknown, these people packed all they had and began their journey west into the Americas. After another long journey across the Atlantic to the Americas, they settled eventually, some of them heading south. The Europe specifically stated they ended their long journey at the furthermost southern border of South America. That area is none other than Tierra del Fuego. So these are these Fuegians that we're talking about or whatever. So it's basically a story of how the Twa spread out all across the world. As we can see, they have a very interesting story that nobody talks about. They pretty much probably the oldest group of human beings on the planet. They're the source of a lot of the mythology that the rest of us subsist off of. Um, you see what I'm saying? A lot of the cultures and religious ideologies, mythology, all that stuff comes from them, and even their migration patterns um, populated most of the known world. You see what I'm saying? So they're some of the most interesting people that nobody talks about. All right, this is the last little section out of that I'm gonna get into out of the first Americans were Africans. Um, this kind of builds on our point from earlier. I know we were talking about the Vikings earlier. I know I've been kind of jumping around historically and everything like that, but I just want to go back to that point we made about the Vikings. This is page 69. It's agreed that the Vikings came to America before Columbus. However, when the Vikings first reached the Americas, they met a people who had already been in the Americas nearly 100,000 years. According to a New York Times article, they met a group of short Africans to whom the Vikings called the Skraelings. The Vikings themselves said the Skraelings looked like African pygmies. The evidence points to the Skraelings being in Canada and New England, even before the time period of the Lenape, who they preceded. The idea that the first Americans were Africans from the east and not Asia from west was a surprise. Obviously, there are no Skraeling pictures in existence today in Canada nor in North America. However, they can be seen in Mexico and all over South America. Okay, now peep this. This is out of page 314. This is out of Pygmy Kitabu, right? Um, okay, so the human race is always increasing at times, and at other times decreasing. The Egyptian priests informed Solon of Athens in Plato's story of the Atlantis cataclysm. Hermitage Papyrus tells of a rather radical decrease in population. I show thee the land upside down. The sun is veiled and shows not in the sight of men. None can live when the sun is veiled by the clouds. None knoweth that midday is there. The shadow is not discovered. No, not dazzling in the sight when he, the sun, is beheld. Okay, the pole shifts or the south uh let's see, the south becoming north. Okay, we talked about this in the previous video. Remember, I was talking about this is a cycle of a few million years, if I'm not mistaken. I'll go back and the book by Malik Jabbar where he talks about it, but he's talking about an event where the 23.5 degree axis of the planet, the tilt, it opens up and it changes and it goes all the way around, and you'll hear the Egyptians talk about a time when the sun rose in the west and set in the east. And they talk about that happened at least two times or what have you. Well, that's a very rare and very long cycle that takes place, but that does happen. That's a polar shift cycle. He's about to talk about it here. So the human race is always increasing, decreasing. Okay, the pole shift or the south becomes north. When the Egyptian earth turns over, the Egyptian pride themselves on being the most ancient people in the world. In their authentic annals, wrote the Roman scholar Pomponius Mela in the treatise De Cita Orbis. One may read that since they have been in existence, the course of the stars has changed direction four times, and that the sun has set twice in the part of the sky where it rises. Same thing we just said. Egyptian priests told the Greek historian Herodotus that four such changes of direction occurred during the 341 generations that followed the advent of the first king. He calculated on the basis of 3 generations per century that the 341 generations span more than 11,000 years, four times in this period. So they told me the sun rose contrary to his wont. Twice he rose where he now sits. So basically, the sun rose in the west two times, and twice he set where he now rises. Reported Herodotus. So this thing that I'm talking about, this pole shift, happened four times that they can recall in their recorded history. All right, the Earth turn. This is page 316. We're gonna try to wrap it up. I know we've been rocking for about a solid hour, so we'll try to wrap this up. But last one. The Earth turns. The Earth turns over when the Andaman pygmy deity breaks the giant tree and supports the Earth from below, and thereby removes the struts from under the Indian Earth. The fiery lightning of the Ife legend turns the world upside down. The Ife deity sometimes punishes sinners by dispatching a man-eating leopard. That's what happens in, I think, in the Popol Vuh, the Aztec mythology. That's how the first age ends. The Apalkuva Gorana creator releases the blue tiger. The first of the four Aztec world ages came to an end when ferocious cats devoured the residents of the earth and the sun disappeared. The first Aztec world age or sun was called by the title Nahui Ociotl. Four tigers. I know I'm mispronouncing words left and right. As in ocelot. In some texts, the man-eating tigers attack at the end of the fourth Aztec world age. Other texts describe a global flood as the climactic event of the fourth Aztec world age. The man-eating leopard of Ife theology polishes off occasional sinners. The legend of the world turned upside down in the Deluge story describes geophysical events that are said to terminate every world age. The numerous American Indian systems of the four suns or world ages arrange pygmy legends in arbitrary schemes that differ from the one locality to the next. The related cataclysms are separated and assigned to different areas, to different eras. The pygmy legends and concepts uniquely explain the otherwise incomprehensible symbolism and events of the four Amerindian suns that correspond with the four world ages of the Hindu, Greek, and Celtic cosmology. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of wrap this up. Um, yeah, just kind of adding a little bit more context. This bleeds into a lot of the other stuff we've been talking about as far as the pygmy trois. It's kind of going into the deluge, the relevance of this 12,000 year ago span of time, the migration patterns, and the length of time, the expanse of time that the pygmies or the Twa have actually been around or what have you, just based off their migration patterns. Because even when we talk about the records of the Egyptians, they talking about, tens of thousands of years. But when we really get into the migration patterns of the Twa, we going back um, as far as Tierra del Fuego, that's a quarter of a million years. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's gonna add to a whole little deep dive on the Twa. I mean, and it's a lot of material. It's a lot more to really go into as far as that, and we'll do future videos on the Twa to kind of continue to flesh this thing out. But I appreciate y'all for rocking with me. I know it's been about an hour into this. Y'all like what y'all been hearing? Like and subscribe. We're gonna keep pumping them out. Appreciate y'all.